or where kind of in the production space you can figure out how to scrunch the budget, because now that you can get away with opening up the color space a little bit more.
Right. Well, I mean, I kind of have a love-hate relationship with this camera. That's what we're kind of both in that position. This is the camera that brought me back out of retirement. And basically, I told myself, if it gets to the point where I can do it myself without a studio, I'm getting back into business. And this camera does allow you to compete with the studio as long as you have the right script, the right material. Basically, character-driven script. You can produce something that anyone else can produce if you have the creativity. Now, that being said, this camera still has a lot of bugs. It's got a long way to go. Every shoot, I find that there's some sort of problem, generally in post. And it's like I said, it's still an ongoing process with this camera. And we were speaking about budget. That kind of speaks to budget. I mean, it allows you to make a film on a very tight budget. I think probably we're looking at budgets under $100,000 now to make a decent film. And the only problem now is where you're going to show it, and how are you going to advertise it. That's the area that I pretty much work in. I'm not so much a technical person as these people. I'm more of a general producer. So that's kind of the area that I work in. I'm not too concerned with how I get. I'm all about the finished product. I'm not too concerned with how I get to the finished product as long as I have an acceptable product.
So Art, I know you worked as an assistant camera person.
Yes.
And that's one of the things that I've seen change as the kind of technology has miniaturized, and that there's been some pretty dramatic changes in the way that the AC is treated. I wonder if you could speak a little bit towards whether you'd like to continue, right now, whether you would choose to continue to work with an AC, or whether you want a DIT/AT AC, or kind of where you would go with that. The AC is the assistant camera person, so that's the person who really assists the cinematographer or DP every minute with all the tasks that they have, as far as changing the lenses, remounting the rail sets, kind of positioning the camera, powering the camera, that kind of stuff. And that role has changed really dramatically in my lifetime. So.
Yeah, we're actually a little worried about where the next generation of camera assistants have come from. We're trying to find people in the area who are willing to do it. They don't want to be filmmakers, which is great, but we also need camera assistants. So, it's hard to say. A lot of camera assistants are also learning how to become DITs, with budgets being what they are. DIT, sorry, digital imaging technician. Basically, you don't really need a video engineer with these cameras anymore. What you need is someone to handle the data, someone who can set up the camera and then watch the data, do quality control, copy it all out. Because at the end of the day, you want whatever you record on this hard drive here, where the hard drive would be used in that cage, but you want that data to go at least two different directions, because it's not like you're handing a roll of film off to someone. You know where this film is going to be because it's this big and you can't erase it. So the DIT does quality control. Basically, they've got a laptop, a bunch of drives, and they look through everything and make sure the camera's recording okay. And they're basically quality control. Assistants and DITs are merging. On big shoots, you can't really do that because you really do need a dedicated DIT to look at everything. We don't have as many camera assistants as we used to, because it used to be you'd have a camera assistant for every camera, and now we have a camera assistant for every 2 cameras. It all kind of depends on the budget. But I mean, the role of the camera assistant is primarily to make sure things are in focus, because if I'm looking through the camera, by the time someone, I'm on an 85mm lens, by the time someone walks from 12 feet to 6 feet, and if I'm trying to follow my focus, I mean, they're going to be all over the place, because by the time I see that out of focus, it's too late. So the camera assistant is watching where they are in relation to the lens. They've got, they've got a tape measure. They've measured out the marks. They're looking at, marks on the ground. They know how far things are. And as the actor passes certain marks, they're tracking them and keeping them in focus. And that's the key role of the camera assistant. Everything else is kind of secondary. It used to be making sure that the camera in the film world was set up properly, so you had the proper shutter, you had the proper, aperture set. The film wasn't getting scratched, that kind of stuff. Now, it's really all about focus and moving the camera around and changing the lenses and stuff like that. It's not. Well, the data usually ends up being the DIT. I really
I've done DIT work.
Right, and these days, if the producer says I can't afford a DIT, I say, okay, you're doing it, because my camera system doesn't have time. And it's, and it's not that hard to set them up at a basic level with a laptop and the right programs and a few hard drives. And then do that with a lot of my clients. But, the camera system is really crucial. The DIT isn't crucial until you lose a lot of data. And that's usually when a producer realizes, I need to hire someone to do this. It doesn't happen that often. I have never had it happen to me, but I've heard stories. And especially with this camera, you really have to watch the data that comes out of this camera because there are glitches, there are hard drive failures, there's all sorts of weird stuff that can happen.
So I'm going to let Craig just address real quick the hiring and firing of DOTs and
Yeah.
ACs. And
The DIT is where everyone wants to scrim, and I highly advise against it.
that's just because you don't want to do it.
No, basically, that's where a lot of your problems happen. Just practically, when you're on a shoot, you're shooting 12, 15, 18 hours a day, and, your camera system doesn't want to do it. Your cinematographer obviously is not going to do it. As a producer, your hands are full, and I'm not, I'm all thumbs, right? I have dyslexia. I'm not the right guy to tell a computer, so that's where your problems are going to happen. And it's, you think, well, this guy's only working, a few hours, but it takes a long time to transfer. It's a lot of tracking. It's a lot of keeping track of what you're doing. And I think a DIT is essential. I generally have 3 people operate the cameras. I have a cinematographer, for at least a first AC, sometimes a second AC, and that guy will generally be a trainee or an intern. But and you have to have, and I love to have, someone transferring data. That's a lot of times I'm working for people that don't want to do that, and they invariably run into some kind of problems. You want to change a drive as soon as possible. Make sure your drive's not freezing. These drives, especially the new double capacity drives, are highly prone to freezing up. So you don't want to run it for 2 or 3 days and find out you can't get your data off, which I've done, and at the behest of people that don't want to hire someone to do that. So, that's just where I'm at.
So one of the things that I think is significant here in this conversation that's come up has been that there's kind of some new positions that are coming into the film world. And I think Silicon Valley is really poised to capture some of that energy and some of that creativity and some of that innovation. Because I think that we specialize in people that work with data and know data systems, know hard drives, know what a hard drive is capable of. Craig
That's
told
only,
me.
I was going to say, that's only part of it. I mean, it's this piece and it's that piece. How I got into being a DIT, which is because I've been on several shoots, and it's getting to this point where you have this merging of someone who understands the image and the image quality issues. Like your AC wants to make sure things are in focus and that your things are lit properly, and then you have someone who is, especially working with these finicky DSLR cameras, you want to have someone who understands how to get the image out, how to translate image problems back to the cinematographer, as well as all of the image archiving issues. And I mean, I worked on a red shoot where we actually had the CF card thing fail. And it's like the hard drive froze, the CF card reader wasn't working, and I figured out it was because they were yanking the cards out by wiggling them, and I'm like, you guys are breaking pins on the cards, you can't do that. It's like a computer, it's not like an old Bolex that you can drop on the ground and maybe it'll still work. I worked on a Canon 7D shoot. We had 2 Canon 7Ds. We had two units, a main unit and one doing B-roll and backup shots. And one of my tasks was they would bring me the chips, bring me an 8 GB chip, and I'd run it into one computer. I actually had 2 computers set up. One to just download the information and verify that it was all good, that there were no data errors, and then I had another computer that I was actually beta testing some software on that takes that file, duplicates it, and turns it into ProRes. And I spent 12 hours on set, completely busy the entire time, just getting chips, handling chips, double checking the information, opening the file, making sure that the lighting was right. And in fact, the first 2 chips that they handed me, I finally had to pull the director aside and sort of yell in his ear going, you gotta tell this guy he's not getting enough light. And they're, but these things can shoot in the dark. No, they can't shoot in the dark, and the image you're giving me is not good enough. And finally, he sort of nudged the cinematographer and said, you know, you really should look at, listen to her. Because I was actually opening the files, looking at them to make sure that the quality was there. It used to be you couldn't quite do that. You had to rely on the fact that your cinematographer and your camera assistants were getting the film, and that the film, you had to trust that it was well exposed, and then it would go to the lab and it would get developed properly. Now with the digital, because it's bits, there's not a lot of room for error. So what's happening now is the DIT is sort of this merge between a post-production person and a camera person. And I would
I
say
think there's some QA in there too.
it's QA, it's data management, it's workflow management, and so you have to kind of wear 4 or 5 hats. But I really think as we move forward with the Arri Alexa, or like I know a couple of people who shot on the G20, G21, you have to, I think the DIT and or First AC are sort of kind of going to merge at some point. They're trying to come up with a new description, because with these cameras, if you don't have someone who's paying attention to the images you're pulling off the camera and safeguarding them, that you have like double and triple copies. I mean, every shoot I work on, someone takes a hard drive home with an extra copy of all the day's files and takes it offset, puts it at their house. It's a safeguarded copy. And I've actually had files corrupt, and because we had 2 extra copies, we were safe.
So that's another